Middle Path Radio, your number one online Islamic talk station.
Welcome to Straight Talk. I'm your host, Quddus Ali. Tonight we are discussing Valentine's Day. The title of the topic we decided is, what's the big deal? What's the big deal with Valentine's Day? And to discuss this issue, we have a special guest today with us in our studio, Brother Moinul Islam. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Welcome to the show.
Jazakallah khair for inviting me to your show.
Barakallahu fiqh. So, dear listeners, you can listen to us on Middle Path Radio, and you can call us as well on 07477 080248. Please don't forget to text us as well. You can text us, and you can also call in and ask Brother Moinul in the studio anything relevant, anything you want to discuss on tonight's show. You can raise your questions, comments, and you can also raise any questions and comments you have about the answers the brothers give in the show. So we wanted to discuss this, and you may wonder why we want to discuss such a topic, because it is really a simple thing. It's just a Valentine's Day. Unfortunately, there is more deeper issue in relation to that, which a lot of us overlook a lot of the time. We just think when the day comes, we think, oh, it's just it's an issue of just giving some gifts and chocolates and gifts and expressing our love and affection for the loved ones that we care for. Unfortunately, even myself, I didn't know until now that how important historically this day had been. And so this is why we wanted to kind of share some of our thoughts on this. Valentine's Day actually started long time ago. It originated as a Western Christian liturgic feast day honoring one or more early saints named Valentines, and it is recognized as a significant cultural and commercial celebration in many regions around the world. Several martyrdom stories associated with the various Valentines that were connected to February the 14th were added to later metrologies, including a popular hagiographical account of Saint Valentine of Rome, which indicated he was imprisoned for performing weddings for soldiers who were forbidden to marry and for ministering to Christians who were persecuted under the Roman Empire. According to legend, during his imprisonment, Saint Valentine healed the daughter of his jailer, Astorus, and before his execution, he wrote her a letter signed "Your Valentines" as a farewell. So this is where he actually originated from. The first day, the day became associated with romantic love within the circle of Geoffrey Chaucer in the 14th century, when the tradition of courtly love flourished. In 18th century England, it evolved into an occasion in which lovers expressed their love for each other by presenting flowers, offering confectionery, and sending greeting cards known as Valentines. So this is where it all started from. Now you may wonder how this is all linked to today. I mean, how important is it that this has become? Well, across the world, every single country in the West, they celebrate this day. Although it may not be a day of national holiday, but it is a very significant day in a lot of people's life, and it affects people from across the board. It affects children, it affects adolescents, it affects teenagers. So it's across the board and is widely practiced unfortunately in Muslim countries as well. Just to give you some figures on this, Valentine's Day is more than just a day of romance. For brands, it provides a much-needed sales boost following a post-Christmas and New Year slowdown. So this is a event where it actually boosts economic activities in the economy. And according to the Daily Telegraph, £1.6 billion will be generated just on that day alone. So this is quite important to know that this day is not just about expressing love, and the gifts is more than that. So just to go back to my guest, Brother Moinul, I have a question for you, brother. What does this day mean for the people, and how widely it is celebrated across the world?
I mean, like you said, this is celebrated widely across the world, and Valentine's Day for everyone It's a day where they show appreciation for the people they love or adore. Some people take their loved ones for romantic dinner at restaurants, while others may choose this day to propose, get married. Many people give greeting cards, chocolates, jewelry, flowers, particularly roses, to their partners or their admirers on this particular day. But there are some cultures where, for example, in Finland, Valentine's Day is seen as a friend's day, or rather than appreciating the loved ones. It's more to do with acknowledging and appreciating the friends on that particular day. Same thing for Guatemala as well, where it's a day of love and friendship. So while they are appreciating the loved ones, at the same time they acknowledge the friendship that they have, and it's like you said, it's widely celebrated. And it's not actually, obviously we see it's not celebrated based on the historical context. Rather, it's more, today the way Valentine's Day is celebrated is more to do with romance. And like you said, it's more deeper than just the romantic aspect of this day.
Yeah, some will argue that, look, some say it's evolved from the Christian religion or from the Christian church. I've heard some people say that. I mean, from your understanding, is that something? Can you link that?
It is correct. Because in origin, Valentine's Day is not very clear, but many sources do believe that it stems from the story of Saint Valentine's, like you've mentioned, and he was a Roman priest and he was martyred on around February the 14th. Now, he became a patron saint, and that was due to the Roman king at the time. He believed that young soldiers were better at fighting than those that are married. So he abandoned or he forbade young soldiers from getting married. And this is something that, St. Valentine's, he didn't really agree with. So he secretly was marrying young couples off. And then he was caught and he was killed. And what Christianity did was, in order to Christianize this Roman pagan ritual, they themselves took St. Valentine's Day upon themselves to celebrate. They did this with Christmas as well, where they've actually adopted pagan rituals to satisfy, pagan rituals, so people become Christians. And so, you could see within that religion there was a lot of compromises where they adopted different pagan rituals in order to appease people.
Okay, this practice actually is not from Islam, but unfortunately you see a lot of Muslims in the Muslim world practicing this day. And how do Muslims view this day in the UK and across the world from your experiences that you've had?
Well, if those of the people who read the local paper, The Eastern Life, not this week, the issue that was released previous week, there was a double spread page.
Wow.
Where people have left messages for their admirers or their loved ones, and predominantly they were Muslims. We're just talking about Tower Hamlet, so you could imagine how many people tried to get their messages in, but probably couldn't.
Sure.
But those that did, they filled up the double page themselves. And if you're looking at the Muslim mode in general, the Pakistan Prime Minister during this period, he condemned this celebration, saying it goes against the Muslim culture. However, they do and are practiced widely, whether it's in Pakistan or Indonesia or Saudi Arabia. Even those countries, they're banned. Even in Iran, they're banned. But you'll have shops that are selling flowers, selling gifts, particularly for this day. Which suggests, even though people do practice it, but generally still is seen as a taboo in those countries, in those societies.
As a country, as a state, I see what you're saying. But I was looking at online in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, for example, there's restaurants that are promoting discounts for that night. That if you attend if you want to have a meal with your loved one on that night, is 40% reduced rate. So people are encouraged to go and obviously utilize this offer. So you can appreciate that even in Muslim countries it's being practiced quite heavily. Although
we shouldn't really be surprised by this. This regime, whether it's a kingship, whether it's a dictatorship, whether it's a military rule, whether it's a democracy, at the end of the day, all of these governments in their own form, they're secular. And they're secular societies as well. Therefore, when it comes to Valentine's Day, for them, slowly, this celebration, which is a Western export, slowly is taking influence in the Muslim world, and people are seeing this as more of a norm. And with social media it's more readily available, these ideals, these celebrations. And so we shouldn't be actually surprised, these taking place in the Muslim countries.
Jazakallah khair. I'm going to take you to a different question now. I did touch on it initially. In terms of living in a capitalist society here, we live in this country, we're part of this country. And in terms of after the Christmas and the New Year, you've had this slowdown. Do you think this day has anything to do with to boost? And do you think the retail outlets, the businesses and the multinational corporations, they in fact, to an extent, have a vested interest in this day, and therefore they promote it as well? So to what extent would you say commercial outlets benefit from this?
Well, they most certainly do. And if you look at the US this year, Valentine's Day, it has been estimated to contribute 19.7 billion to the economy.
Wow.
And you've already given the statistic for the UK where it's over $1 billion. So these are, and also, and it's also, the research also suggests that men significantly spend more than women do, and women complain how men are not romantic enough. But just a point, these are significant figures, and it's a small window. Whereas if you look at Christmas, there's a build up to it. From 2 months on, they're building up towards Christmas, and people are getting ready for Christmas. They're buying their gifts, they're buying the decoration, everything that is geared towards Christmas. People are already planning. Whereas this is just the one day, and the window is far more smaller. Yet it generates this kind of income. So if you're if you're looking at these businesses, yes, of course, it does actually give them a boost. And as far as the businesses are concerned, for them, it's not about, encouraging, compassion and love between people, but for them, it's to capitalize on people's feelings and try and maximize their profit as a result of this. And what they will do is, by promoting and advertising products, gifts, and discounted gifts, discounted meals, holidays. By doing this, they're already preparing people that, look, this day is coming. You got your loved ones, and you need to start spending money effectively so that you can show your appreciation to your loved ones. And this is how they would capitalize. At the end of the day, the businesses, so they any avenue they have to generate an income, they will exploit that. Yes, of course, and they'll utilize that.
So I think the bottom line from what you're saying is that effectively it's the multinational corporations who take advantage of this day and financially benefit from this day. So, but there may be some people who say, look, you say that, but at the end of the day, we as customers need to go and buy things. We're showing an expression of love on that day. So why are you making it such a ideological issue? How would you respond to that?
For people would have, it's always been a tradition where you buy chocolates and roses on this particular day to express your love or feelings towards someone else. There's nothing to suggest, if this is the way you want to do it, no one's suggesting there's anything wrong with this, if that's how people want to express them. And in terms but from the business perspective, any retailer that's in this industry would naturally capitalize on this opportunity. It's a well celebrated occasion. So for any retailer not to take advantage of this, from a business perspective, it would be naive. Now, it's become a culture. Where there's a culture that exists and is ingrained within societies, that demand would always be there. Even if these retailers don't sell their products, people still would find a way of celebrating this. Because as far as they're concerned, that's part of their way of life, it's part of their lifestyle, it's part of their culture. So I don't think it's really to do with gifts per se, but it's more to do with the fact that it's part of people's culture in the West.
Sure.
And which is why, and on the businesses, what they do is they will take advantage of this opportunity and try and generate an income.
Jazakallah khair. Just to remind the listeners once again, you can call in on 07477 080248 and raise your questions or comments, inshallah. You can also text us on the same number, 07477 080248. We did have another guest who was supposed to be joining us, but unfortunately he was stuck in traffic. So inshallah, I'm hoping that he will be joining us very shortly. Going back to the discussion, Brother Moinul, obviously we've discussed the fundamentals and you've discussed about how it affects the economy and how multinational corporations benefit. We want to now go into establishing and possibly exploring the impact it has on the society. So, in your opinion, what are the pros and cons of this celebration? You cannot from a society point of view, how does it affect us living in this country and across the board, even for non-Muslims living here as well? Yeah.
Sure. You cannot look at this celebration in isolation. So you can't just take Valentine's Day as a separate, kind of festivity. Rather, this celebration is actually based on liberal values this society is based upon. And this is where the celebration comes from. The activities that take place on this day are not as a result of the celebrated day. So people that people that engage in particular activities on this particular day, it's not because of Valentine's Day per se. Rather, it's due to the liberal values of freedom that people adhere to. And this is where, in terms of relationship, in terms of, how you want to show your affection towards your partner or your loved one, your wife, your husband, whatever. It comes from their values, which is based on the pillars of freedom in this society. So we got to look at and scrutinize these values rather than the day itself.
It seems that you're just trying to give the cons, not the pros. You don't have any pros to say, any pros for this day. The impact it maybe brings up. People will argue that a lot of maybe couples have. Some argue that maybe couples have animosity during other months and other days of the week. And if that day allows people to get together and encourage love and affection, so surely that must be a good thing.
Well, I'm sure people don't, put on a calendar, they mark it on February the 14th. That's the day. If I have any issues or quarrels with my partner, this is the day I'm going to reconcile it. In any day of the year, you could have problems. You could, show your affection, and you could try and resolve your issues. If you're saying, February the 14th is the day where people can actually get together and resolve the issues, people don't actually, think like that or behave like that. They're not going to put it in the diary on this particular day. I'm going to, have words with my partner and I'm going to try and resolve the issues that we've had. No, what I'm saying is, these activities that people engaging on this particular day, people do this regularly throughout the year. Sure. People show affection. People show how much they love and adore their partners. Throughout the year. Whereas this particular day does it really boost people's relationships? Yeah. No, not necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jazakallah khair. Dear listeners, just to let you know, we have our second guest in the studio now, Brother Mamoon, who is a teacher. Assalamu alaikum, brother. Welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam.
You finally made it, inshallah. Yeah. Basically, so we were discussing, Brother Mamoon, on this pros and cons, and Brother Moinul, we just touched upon that in terms of that. Why is it that just this day that we should show our expressions of love and affection? I mean, what have you got to add to that?
What's the
question was, what is, in your opinion, the pros and the cons of this celebration? We were discussing Valentine's Day.
I mean, the pros and the cons, it depends on which perspective you actually look at it from.
Yeah, because he was only giving the cons, not the pros. Do you have any pros to give?
The pros is, there's a lot of actually pros for the Western society, especially, or the business actually minded people. For example, if you look at the cards industry or the chocolate industry or the flowers industry, they say that 19.9 million cards are actually exchanged on this day, just before this day or on that day, during that day. If you look at, I'm not sure, if you look at the commercial benefits to Valentine's Day is huge. They say that it's 18.9 billion, per year. So these are some of the good benefits. For this manufactured day of love, this manufacture of Day of Love, it doesn't actually benefit anyone, but it only benefits the corporates, the business people, and etc. What the ills that it actually brings to the common people is misery, is suicide, alcoholism, violence, because vying for a girl, an attractive girl, you may have a lot of competitors, you see, a lot of heroes going for one girl in the college. And because of that, there may a lot of violence may ensue.
Sure.
And due to that, the spread of that is that the family gets in between and they get affected. So these are some of the benefits and cons of having Valentines. And of course, not to mention, you have the condom sales going up, in big time.
Which I was going to just come to that actually, on this point about relationship and the consequences of these loose relationships. Some argue that some schools of thought argue that the consequences of loose relationship and informal relationship causes promiscuity, rape, and adultery. To what extent do you agree with such a statement?
I mean, this statement is actually, it's not only from a Muslim perspective.
Yeah, generally.
Generally, it is actually a very true perspective. Because as they say that, suicide, because what happens is that during the Valentine period, a lot of, especially women, they tend to feel very lonely. If they don't get any offers like for chocolates or secret admirers, they think maybe they're not good looking enough. They may think, for example, like they will not be able to have a love life or a relationship. And of course, with Muslims is that our relationship is actually is a family organized thing. Whereas unfortunately, with the Western world, with people who are not Muslims, they have to fend their own husbands and own boyfriends.
But Moinul initially, you wasn't here at the time. He said even in Muslim countries, this is being widely practiced. So these are your Muslim brothers and sisters who are practicing. So some will say, why are you just attacking the Western?
Unfortunately, this practice in the Muslim world has brought about a polarization. So whereby you have some educated or middle class or upper class, families who are very in tune to actually the media, because not to forget that these events and these the beautification of this day is actually pushed by media and electronic media. If you look at, for example, like Gulf News, they would be actually talking about the top 10 hotels to to book during Valentine's Day, the top 10 trips, or for example, what are the best gifts to actually buy. So these are some of the headlines of electronic media and print media. So when these things are pushed in the Muslim world, you have a polarized community. And when this polarized community gets out of hand, you have riots like in Pakistan. So for example, in northwest Pakistan, you have people actually coming to the streets and protesting against obviously they're saying that no to Valentine's Day. And other think tanks or secularists, women or men, they come in and saying, what's wrong with love? But it's not a simple love. One letter, saying that I love you, given in secret, can actually lead to a teenage pregnancy or a pregnancy that is, unwanted pregnancy that is dumped in the corner of a street.
Jazakallah khair. I was going to come back to you on that point actually, about the consequences. Brother Moinul, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was going to add something too. When you asked the question, consequences of loose and informal relationship causes promiscuity, rape, and adultery. Now, these loose relationships are based on liberal values, and they are liberal values because they're loose values. That's what it is. Where one has freedom to express. What does that mean? It means.
Can you define what liberalism just briefly? Then, what do you mean by?
Liberalism is basically a political philosophy. You could say it's a political or social philosophy that advocates liberty and equality.
Isn't that a good thing? Because this is what the world wants to embrace. And a lot
of
the countries in the world want to embrace.
When we're talking about liberty and equality, what they mean by that is it's advocating freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of the individual, free market policy, freedom of religion. However, these ideals, they look appeasing. However, these are actually, they come and they stem from the mind of human beings, man. And man naturally is going to be biased towards his own inclination and towards his own desires. So therefore you are going to get inconsistencies and contradiction and disharmony in society, which is what we see today. And
But not all relationship end up in a loose relationship. Some will argue from non-Muslim that they don't get married for a long time, 10, 15 years. They're living together as husband and wife.
I mean, the thing is like,
what's wrong with that? I mean, some listeners will say, look, you may say marriage is a good thing, but I'm not married, and I've been with my partner for the last 15 years.
But that is, I mean, if you look at the number of marriages or even relationship that last compared to the ones that don't last and they fall apart, the ones that actually fall apart are significantly far more higher than the ones that actually last. So you got to question yourself: why is it that relationships or even marriages in the in the Western societies, why is it that majority of them they don't last? That's what you need to question.
Right. Okay, Brother Mamun.
I was going to say that Islam has come about with a relationship.
Yeah, we're going to come back to the Islam, but if you could just on the causes that not every relationship that is done through a loose, informal method is going to end up in, because some listeners could say that, look, I'm in a relationship for last 15 years and I'm not married, and I give my wife.
But the thing is,
how would you want to deal with that?
Yeah, the thing is, as a liberal person, he would actually argue from that perspective. That's right, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But as a Muslim, I will argue that, look, when we actually saying what is the right way forward, we're saying that we're saying that, for example, like the correct way of having a relationship is with the marriage. When you don't have actually marriage and you have a relationship, you are actually not saying, you are not actually declaring that, through this relationship, I will take ownership of the consequences of this relationship. And one of the important consequences of the relationship is children. Yeah, you're not declaring that in any way. So that means that, a person could have the relationship because this is in the forefront of his mind. So when they have this relationship, they have, their sexual encounters, they have their, one-night stands and what have you. But what comes after it is very important, and it actually breaks the fabric of society. And what we are saying is that, when you have a relationship, you need to declare this relationship, you need to tie it with a marriage. In a sense that, this relationship, you take ownership of this relationship and you take the consequences of this relationship, which is, building a family. And this is why, as a Muslim, we value marriage as opposed to having a loose relationship. And we can see a lot of the ill effects of the society from loose relationships.
Jazakallah khair. Once again, listeners, don't forget to call in. The number to call in is 07477 080 and you can also text us with your comments on or any questions you may have regarding the topic today that we are discussing. Inshallah, it's a very interesting topic, and Alhamdulillah, Mamun Bhai has just completed the question that I just asked him, which brings me to the next question on the impact.
And the other thing is if you actually look at a lot of this loose relationship, what it has is that you can't actually really identify. I know you can argue from the science perspective about who the father is of a child. You see, if you look at Western statistics, the lot of the people don't know actually who the father of the child is. Whereas with the marriage, you are, when you go into a relationship, you can definitely say, if both partners are faithful, obviously, that, this child belongs to them. Whereas with a loose relationship, you can't.
Good point.
And this is one of the demoralizing thing of the child when he grows up as well.
Jazakallah khair. That's a good point, which I'm going to come back to on the issue of children. But before I do, I have a question through a text. I've just received a text from a brother who's saying Muslims need to loosen up a bit. We can do a halal Valentine, and why can't we not? Can we not have a halal Valentine's Day? We should loosen up.
It's like saying that why can't we have a democratic Islam? Why actually carry the baggage if the baggage is actually comes from a root that is filthy and rotten and which doesn't even have a basis? I'm not sure whether Moinul has actually covered the origin of Valentine. It is a very filthy background where, for example, like if I can just add,
sure.
That there's two sayings about the origins of of this Valentine. One is that men would actually turn naked and they would actually sort of like slaughter a dog and an animal and use the skins as a hide and to actually spank or whip women, because women believe that by whipping them it increases their fertility. And during that festive time, what would happen is that women, and also during the festive time, men would actually draw names of women from a jar, and they will then match make between the men and women, and they will be asked to actually go and have relationship. So this is one aspect. The other aspect is obviously about the Valentine who's been executed, and we know about the soldiers and that. So they amalgamated the two together, and this is what we actually present. So why call it a Islamic Valentine? Anything that it does not actually comes about from Islam is so false, so confusing, that we as Muslims who are bearer of actually shining light to the world, we need to actually drop it. If you look at, for example, September, the word September means 7, but it's actually 9th month of the year. If you look at October, octagon, it actually 8 sides, but it's actually 10th month of the English calendar nowadays. So whether it's Christmas, whether it's the day of the month, all these months, names of the months, these are all pagan, have pagan roots. And don't tell me that we need to actually, make this day called, Islamic Valentine, because we don't actually propagate anything that is filthy as that.
I think Brother Moinul wanted to say something on that.
Suggesting
Islamic Valentine's Day, Moinul?
Suggesting like a halal Valentine's Day is almost like saying, why don't we have halal pig? It's an oxymoron. It just doesn't go.
This is to your wife, isn't it? You're trying to express your life to your wife.
Valentine's Day has a very specific connotations, and that is where you're actually accepting any form of relationship, even if it's outside the institution of marriage. And you could have a formal, you could have a relationship, you could have, you could engage in any kind of.
Sorry, brother, can I just hold on? I've just got another text, which is a very interesting text from a listener. He's saying, Salam brothers, Valentine's Day is not about promiscuity. It's actually about showing love and affection to your loved one. So what's wrong with that? I think your guest speakers have the wrong impression of Valentine's Day. So, Brother Moinu, you were just saying actually something on that.
Saying,
can you elaborate?
What I was saying was
clarify the
Valentine's Day has a very specific connotations to it, which means, and what that is where you're accepting any form of relationship of any kind, and you could engage in any kind of activities of any kind. Whereas we know as Muslims we're restricted in terms of what we understand what a relationship is, which Mamun Bhai have already explained, which is
we on the Islamic part we're going to come back to, inshallah. Right. Now, Brother Mamun touched on the children, promiscuous children, and illegitimate children that come from this relationship. Now, the impact on society on that is quite vast nowadays. Even children in school. Obviously, you've talked about the consequences of these relationships informal, but in terms of actually children in schools, and obviously young as 6, 7, 8, they're being taught this practice. Even in schools, you will see that they've been taught this practice. So, how do parents and teachers, Muslim teachers, for example, discuss this issue with children, because it's a very sensitive and sometimes embarrassing subject to talk to children about, and a lot of our parents have this concern, Muslim parents, and even some non-Muslim parents have raised concerns that why are children being taught these things at such an early age? So how would you, as a teacher, Brother
the thing is, before parents actually start to actually teach their children about the morality, I think parents need to start teaching themselves about what Islam stands for. For example, if I as a parent, continually watch Bollywood movies or actually Hollywood in my actually sitting room, and then children will not, suddenly will not actually take any advice from me. If the environment of the room is such, then what they are actually bombarded with is romance. If you look at all these films, Bollywood, Hollywood, all you see is the main theme is actually romance, romanticizing a girl, and it's all about premarital sex and and affection and fondness and that kind of thing. That's
the home. But when you go to the school as a teacher, you've experienced. Correct me if I'm wrong. Aren't children being taught these values from an early age? Encouraged, through in their drama classes, acts, love acts, and
only before the school holidays. I saw actually sixth forms. Girls coming into my class and actually selling roses.
See, this is the point I'm trying to make.
So they are raising money, selling roses and etc. But the thing is, it depends whether our children would actually buy it or not buy it, or whether they will be able to actually stand against it in an intellectual way and say that no, this is wrong. But this can only happen if we actually build an environment at home, if we ourselves as parents actually exemplify Islam in our day-to-day lives. I need to ask the question that do the parents understand what Islam stands for? Do parents actually understand that Islam is provides an intellectual leadership for the whole world? It actually shows the world the correct way of living, the correct relationship. Do the parents actually engage in day-to-day in their lives, destroying the bad ideas of the society and building the right, correct ones in their, wider families and relatives? And are they bringing children on board in their dawah work? So if these things happen at home, then surely the children will be able to repel those ideas, will be able to withstand those ideas. Otherwise, it will be really difficult. As I said, Bollywood and Hollywood, if you have that environment at home, it will not be, possible for the child to actually, say, this is definitely wrong. I mean, if I was a parent, for example, I will actually show, if I see, Hollywood film, I'll show, look, this is the consequences of premarital socialization. Socializing between the sexes, between boy and girl. This is the consequences. This is where you end up with violence. This is where you end up with, unwanted babies. It's like me saying that,
But just to interrupt you, sorry, brother, the parents are placed in a rock and a hard place, because here you have values you can teach in school, at home. But then when they go to school and the society and their friends, they're teaching them something else. So how do they reconcile? You see, you got to understand that, because a lot of parents do have that concern. They may be practicing, but the society that they're living in.
My children, and I'm thinking that because with my children, I raised them up from a young age. When I used to go to, dawah events, when I used to go to talks, I carried my children with me. I let my children, immersed into these lifestyle. And for example, other sisters, for example, have taken my daughters on board and got them involved in dawah. So when you're not actually giving dawah, when you don't actually understand Islam,
somebody else
will give you the dawah, and you will actually embrace it.
Yes, Moinul, you had something.
I think Mamoon Bhai has actually he's actually mentioned all the points, but one thing the parents do, and it's quite apparent, is when they send their children to school, they think the teacher's gonna sort my children out. The school is gonna make the good person we want our children to be. Or after school, if they send their children to madrasa, they think the imam is going to,
they become quite complacent
that's right. And this is the way where they discard their own responsibilities. And Mamoon Bhai made a really good point, which is they have to actively play a part in the children's lives. So even in school, knowing the fact that they're being taught other values, whatever, they need to recognize that. So when they are home, they can then deal with those issues and explain from the Islamic perspective what the correct position is in issue. But the other thing is, it's a difficult task, because you don't want to overbear the children. At the end of the day, they're still children.
That's right. And obviously the curriculum, national curriculum, I'm sure when we were at school, we studied Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet at a very early age. And some of us couldn't make sense of these things. So for children, it's quite sensitive.
That's right.
And for parents to discuss, the question was about actually, Jazakallah for tackling, you did mention that, but in terms of how can parents reconcile that? Because you're saying that they should be just good role models and they should teach.
They need to actually
the school is teaching them something else.
They need to build the Islamic values within the children, so they could then determine for themselves as they're growing up what is right and what is wrong. They need to build this Islamic criteria into the children. And you're not going to do it by sending them to school or sending them to the imam. The parents need to do this, and they need to do this actively.
Jazakallah khair. Just to remind our listeners once again that you can call us on 07477 080 to let us have your comments and questions, inshallah. You can also text us. Brother Mamoon,
can
you
I
had
just
something.
Make one last point about this. You're saying that how can they reconcile? As I said, that Islam has to be understood as an intellectual leadership. Meaning that it is the whole basis of Islam is intellectual. It actually agrees with man and is rational. And all the rules that emanates from Islam is also rational. And it actually addresses how to actually organize our lives. And if people actually understand it that way, then you're able to actually sort of like reconcile your mind with all the other mirage that the society actually shows.
Mashallah. Jazakallah khair. Well, I'm just come back. I've gone to the next segment of our discussion. This is where you can discuss about the liberalism and Islam. Yeah. So we're going to, both of you now need to clearly define what are the ill effects of such universally accepted ideology, liberalism. So can you just talk on liberalism, on just define liberalism and how the ill effects? And then Mamun Bhai can talk about
sure.
the Islamic side as well.
I mean, you said in your question this universally accepted.
Yeah,
I think the first thing we need to, the first point we need to address really is that this actually isn't a universally accepted ideology, this liberalism. I mean, if you look at the Muslim
what are the
world,
fundamental human rights and the Geneva Convention and Universal Declaration of Human Rights, are they not incorporated into these values? Liberalist, pluralist society.
But these are funded. The foundation of this is on secularism, where the rules and laws they're devoid of God. As we refer to Allah as
it comes from man.
It comes from man
who is limited and who is needy. Yeah,
and that's right, of course. And in the Muslim world, this liberal ideology, if that's how you want to refer to it, is being imposed on the Muslims by these rulers who are only in place to serve the West. And one of the main functions is to make sure that they're implementing a liberal Western secular style of government. And this fundamentally goes against the population's belief in Islam.
But I have heard from some minor opinion from the Muslim community, some small fringe group of Muslims who say, surely you can talk like this purely because you're in a country where they embrace liberalism and liberal values and promote liberty. So how can you go against that? I mean, how would you respond to these people?
Well,
they actually left their country to come here because of these beautiful values that is promoted by the West.
Well, even if we weren't allowed to speak or express our opinions, as Muslims, we still need to do this, irrespective. So I'm not expressing my views because of the fact that in this country I'm entitled to this. I'm doing it because as a Muslim, that's something we have to do. We have to speak out. In a Muslim world, you get the same thing. I mean, where people are being, they're persecuted, they're imprisoned for speaking out against the government or the way the regime has implemented its systems, but people still continue to do so. Because as Muslims, that's what you have to do.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Brother Mamun, can you elaborate on this issue of how liberalism and Islam, you were talking quite a lot before about Islam, and I was keep on saying that you shouldn't. Now is the time for you to. Can you just elaborate, how do the two different ideologies compare? I mean, from your point of view.
I mean, what I understand by liberalism is that is freeing man's instincts and freeing man's relationship or day-to-day activities in an unorganized way.
Okay, and how does Islam view the relationship?
And what has the dominant side of liberalism has become the capitalist way of life, is the business aspect of it. This is why we find, for example, like in Valentine's Day, only the business companies and corporate industry, card industry, chocolate industry, they thrive, but at the expense and as the misery of the normal people. And we talked about alcoholism, suicide rates, and etc. Whereas Islam actually says that Islam does not actually upholds one side at the expense of all the other sides of man. For example, Islam actually says one of the goals of Islam is actually protect the integrity of the individual, protect the sanctity of life, protect, for example, the chastity, and protect the belief as well. So these are the goals of Islam. So Islam, makes sure that the chastity is protected as well as the life. So with
But do you not think with that comes some element of oppression there? Some will argue. If you look at Muslim countries, Afghanistan, and Iraq, ISIS, this clearly oppressing Islam. So, this is Islam in practice. You saw Muslim in the veil, Muslim women in the veil. Isn't that a sign of oppression?
You see, the Muslims in the Muslim world are trying to establish the correct Islamic way of life through the prophetic method, and this is will be established through the caliphate system. The whole world, Western world, and the dominant world is saying no to caliphate system, and they have actually managed to actually destroy the call in Iraq, and they are managing unless Allah intervenes over here and through our efforts in the suppression of the caliphate system, because they know that caliphate system will be able to compete against their system and abolish their ways of life. So those things that we actually saw in, for example, Afghanistan, those were led by people who were malicious. They did not have the correct understanding of Islam, and they weren't even actually allowed to actually practice Islamic system, because we saw how the whole world were up against the Afghanistani people, and bombardment and petrol tanks being blown through the pathways between Pakistan and Afghanistan because of Muslims trying to actually fight against the imperialists. So Islam as a system was never been implemented properly. So Islam actually, balances people's, organic needs and instincts and sexual relationships as well as survival instinct. And as I said, it has all these goals. Yeah. Unlike the, liberalists who actually only allow the aspect of benefit to thrive.
Jazakallah khair. You wanted to come in, Moinub?
I mean, because one point in the question you asked, how's liberalism failed its followers? I mean, even if you just look at the UK itself, I mean, the liberal economic policies they had, it destroyed people's lives. Many people have lost their jobs and their homes because of the crash that took place in 2008. Most of the world population are living under poverty, and that's due to these liberal economic policies. IMF and the World Bank, which are used by the Western governments, have enslaved many countries, and they're obliged to pay debts that we know for a fact they will never be able to pay. You look at the crime levels in UK; they're at pandemic levels, where the judiciary is at a breaking point. And then you also have a penal system where you got an overpopulated prison, and that just suggests how forthcoming people are when it comes to wanting to commit a crime, and no one fears this penal system, which and that's because most of the offenders are likely to reoffend. If you look at the social fabric of the society, it's been torn apart. Family values almost non-existent, and this is all as a result of these liberal values.
Subhanallah, Jazakallah khair. I was just going to come on that point about fabric of society. I mean, I was just going through some research myself, and obviously precise figures remain elusive, but surveys in the UK show and US suggest that between 25 to 70% of women and 40 to 80% of men have engaged in at least one extramarital sexual encounter. So can you see how it breaks the society? I mean, so in terms of the values, do you think it's directly linked to liberal values, this relationship?
Of course, because people's behavior in the way they act, it stems from what they adhere to, and they adhere to these liberal values. For example, if someone wants to commit a crime, you got this fella who wants to commit this crime, he's thinking, am I going to get caught? And who's going to catch him? It's going to be either someone's going to see him or the police. As long as he can get away with committing this crime, this person is going to commit this crime. And that stems from this idea that, look, I'm free to do what I want.
But do you not think that happens in Muslim community as amongst Muslim couples?
Absolutely,
Muslim
it does. And
men and women.
And this is what, and when you actually live and adhere to the Western value system, you would naturally, as a consequence, would actually face the same problems they do as well. So in our communities, you'd find young people at the age of 14, they're dealing drugs. You have this promiscuous relationship that's taking place, teenage pregnancies. In a Muslim community, I mean, having dealt with divorce for the last 8 years, it is at the level it has reached. It is absolutely shocking. It is absolutely shocking how
because we're part of this society as well, and we are affected by the environment we live in.
When you actually adopt, the Western way of life, you would naturally adopt the Western problems as well. And this is why we see our communities are starting now to catch up.
Jazakallah khair.
Predominantly
Jazakallah. So far, we've just discussed, dear listeners, about how Islam, how Islam will do this, how Islam will do that, and we were, briefly, obviously, we've discussed at length on liberal values. Now, one may wonder that in terms of, does Islam have a glowy, glamorous side to that? Does it recognize relationship? And so this is where I'm going to go back to Brother Mamoon. In Islam, do you have such a thing called love? Can you find true love in Islam, Brother Mamoon? Is there a such thing? I mean, you're a married man, so am I. Is there any true love in Islam? And how do you go about building a relationship in Islam? Because Islam has this interaction of men and women, they meet, and how does Islam regularize that relationship?
Well, actually, Islam You see, relationship is very important part and parcel of a society. And Islam recognizes that because it actually builds the fabric of the society in a very tight and organized way. And if this principle is actually let loose, or if this goes wrong, then whole society can go wrong. This is why Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that marriage between a man and a woman is half of the iman. So Islam places a great value to marriage. And also, but on the contrary, it says, for example, in the Quran, that wala takratun zina innahu fahishatan. It says that don't go near zina because it is fahsha. Because if you look at all the other...
Can you explain what fahsha is?
Fahsha is lewdness, promiscuity, erotica, premarital sex, and all these things that surrounds all these actions and uncleanliness. Anything that associated with this is fahsha. So Islam says don't go even near to zina. But when it comes to, for example, like stealing, it says do not steal, do not commit murder, do not do this. But with the zina, he says don't go near it. Because Allah recognizes the fitrah of a human being, that we are actually built for the opposite sex as well, to cohabit, to have this relationship in an organized way through marriage, and to have siblings, to have children, and etc. And this is why Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that get married as early as possible. When you reach the age of puberty, get married, because it recognizes that there is this attractiveness, instinctiveness, and this is a magnet between man and a woman. He says get married early as possible, give your children to marriage. He says that marriage is half of the iman, and on the contrary, he says don't go near zina. Unlike any other commands.
Some will argue that's a good point. A good point you've mentioned. But how can I get married to somebody who I've just seen? Say, for example, because I'm sure Islam. What you're trying to say is that Islam advocates arranged marriage.
This is a very very good question, because the thing is, one of the reasons why I'm going to actually answer this in an intellectually, for you. One of the reasons why, liberal or secularists will actually tell you that, you need to know the person before you want to get married, because you don't know what this person is like. Does she have a mood swing? Does she, for example, like
hobbies? What does she like? Compatibility. How can you establish compatibility within a half an hour of a meeting?
That's right. And Islam Muslims don't have. Well, in my experience, Muslims don't have this problem. Do you know why? Because Islam regulates my actions, day-to-day action. Islam recommends me a role for me. As a woman, it recommends a role. As a man, it recommends a role. For example, it actually teaches etiquette. It actually teaches morals. So, for example, when it comes to morals, in Western society, it doesn't have any basis. When it comes to etiquette, it doesn't have any basis. The compass keeps on changing. So, when you have a society which does not have any morals, which doesn't even have any etiquettes, which doesn't actually identify itself with any role or models of life, then you are actually dealing with a person that can, is neither here, neither there.
Absolutely.
So you will not be able to actually relate to the person, because you don't know what the response of the other person is going to be. But Islam actually, in Muslim society, when in ideal Muslim society, we don't actually suffer from this, because our ideals, our values, our roles, our etiquettes, our something called classes of actions, fard, haram, mubah, mandub. Islam gave rules and regulations of every action. Islam even tells us actually what are the good way of thinking, what are the bad ways of thinking. It lays all the foundations for us. We have to just organize our life in a given guidance by Prophet ﷺ.
So you're saying there is fun and entertainment.
There is fun, because Muhammad ﷺ actually, in the time of marriage, he says that he can sing, he can dance, he can the drums and all that. So there is this fun and game. Muhammad ﷺ actually used to run with his wife as a fun and joy with Aisha. So this is all allowed in Islam, but it has to be done in the right way.
Jazakallah khair. Moinul, you wanted to come in?
I mean, this point where you've said, how do you effectively strangers get married to one another?
Exactly.
How are you going to possibly do this? I mean, as opposed to what? Where people, it's almost saying, if you get to know one another, then if you know one another,
the relationship is more stronger. But yet they have adultery as well. They commit adultery. They know them each other.
But in Egypt, Cairo University, it's not an Islamic authority. There are what you would refer to as a neutral orientation university, just an academic university. They carried out a survey in their country where you had traditional marriages and which is arranged, which is what you're talking about, and they also had a survey for the love marriages, and what they found was 88% of those people that got married based on premarital relationship have failed. Their marriages collapsed, it fell apart. Whereas those people that got married based on traditional marriage, they were their marriages were actually successful. Very few actually broke apart. Now, I just want to give you an anecdote because today, we live in a community where young couples, they have premarital relationships and then they end up getting married. But what tends to happen is, you got to imagine like a young girl. She's having a relationship with this guy. This guy is always taking her out. He's buying her gifts every week. He's complimenting her every week, and she's hoping when she gets married, this is going to continue into the relationship under halal conditions. Yeah. Then they get married, and then she finds, hang on, he's not taking me out as much. He's not driving me around. I'm stuck at home. I'm with the in-law syndicate, which adds more problem to her situation, and her reality is completely changed. And these are factors where people don't take into consideration when it comes to relationship. Whereas now the husband who used to think, he's got a wonderful girlfriend or whatever, he's thinking, I didn't expect my wife now to be complaining and about these issues. And this is where you start getting discourse, because people don't have they haven't ironed out what the expectations are. They think just basing their relationship on a fragile emotion, which they refer to as love and appearance, somehow that is going to bring stability for the rest of their lives. Whereas the way we understand love is the way Allah explains love to us. It's not the way in the West, the way they, term it in a romantic way.
Jazakallah khair.
So love actually in the Western society means, is confused often with, lust and love. So for example, in our history, we find that Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used to drink from the same tip of the glass where Aisha,
So essentially, what you're saying in Islam, love comes from a responsibility point of view, that we're accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and
that's right. So he would actually drink from the same tip of the cup where Aisha, drank from. He would come, after the whole days of dawah work, come home and then help, his wife, whether it's Khadija, whether it's Aisha. This is love. This is affection. This is taking care of one's wife. Not actually, in Islam we love our wife so much that we say, you don't, when you actually earn an income, this money is yours. You don't have to pay for bills, and you don't have to pay for the mortgage and etc. Whereas with them, they make their wives actually work 50 hours a week and pay for the mortgage, and they divide the cost between them. And this is not the case with Islam.
Jazakallah khair. I think we're running out of time. I've just a final question for you on this point. So just to do justice to Islam, inshallah. So we've discussed about Islam. We've discussed about liberalism. The final question is, obviously the meeting of men and women in any given society is inevitable. Yeah, we accept that. Now, how will, obviously, because it's important we resolve this issue that men and women will meet in various transactional matters in society. So how will Islam regularize the meeting of men and women in society? How will Islam define relationship, given that there are modernists who say that Islam needs to be reformed? You have this school of thought, unfortunately, evolving now, that saying Islam needs to be reformed because in its original form it may not be compatible. I know it's a big question, but if you can just touch up on that. And then there are some who say, now the woman, especially the woman, needs to remain in the four corners of her house. But in Islam, can you just explain how Islam?
The thing is, because Allah has created man and woman, Islam understands that in its given society you will have man and woman. So you'll have 50%, for example, like how can you actually have 50% of the population locked inside the home, four corners of the wall? Islam says that a woman can actually work. She can actually become a teacher. She can become a solicitor. She can become a businesswoman. It allows her to actually go out there and work, but it's her choice. And when actually men interact with these women, Islam places certain rules and regulations. Islam says that, for example, in the Quran, Allah says that lower your gaze to the women and to the men as well. So Islam keeps that modesty. Remember, as I said, that Islam, one of the goals of Islam is to actually protect the chastity, as well as protect life, integrity, and etc. So it says lower the gaze. Islam also actually says, for example, what are the understands people, humans' fitra, and what actually attracts men and women women forward. So he says, for example, like, how to stay in what are the
terms of
private
meeting
space,
segregation,
private space, khalwa and not khalwa. These are the issues that Islam brings. It also actually, for example, says, for example, who are the people that you can actually socialize with. So he says there is concept of mahram.
Jazakallah khair. On this point, I've got a question for Brother Moinul on this social media point. It says the listener has sent a text saying, how can I protect our daughters from social media where they are committing haram? Just 1 minute on that. I think we're...
Again, it comes back to this. You have to be actively involved in your daughter's life.
Social media is so common nowadays.
It's so common, yeah. I mean, they have access to social media through phones, through iPads.
Yeah.
If you want to let them have, access to your iPads or iPhones, you've got to make sure that there are restrictions put on them to begin with, so they don't access these forums. Or the other way is just simply, you give them a...
You need to create an understanding in them, a viewpoint
That's
in
right.
them, reference point that they refer back to Quran and Sunnah in Islam, isn't it? Otherwise...
But this takes time. It doesn't happen over time. This is why you have to actively take part in the children's lives and build these values into them so they know for themselves what is right and what is wrong. By the time they age 7 or 8, they should understand what is right and what is wrong. They should start learning these things. They should start applying these things. But this only comes when you're actively taking part. In terms of specifically about social media, practically, like I said, you could put restrictions on your products. The other thing is you can allocate specific times that they use iPad or whatever, so you know exactly what they're doing on them. These are the practical things you're doing. But in the long run, you really have to take part actively. An interest in your...
Jazakallah khair. Would you want to add anything, Brother Mamun?
No, I just want, what I wanted to say, for example, like Islam, places a lot of emphasis and importance to this. This is why it's got a lot of actually guidance on the social aspects. So, for example, like what type of clothes that women should wear, what type of clothes that the men should wear in public space. So it has the concept of hard aura, soft aura. I mean, what part of the body you can reveal, whether a woman can actually wear perfume when she goes out. How should, as I said, talked about how should men and women view, look at each other, in what point can they actually talk to each other or transact. It says about the business things as well. So it also says, for example, like when someone should get married, as I said, in the age of puberty, the dress code, you name it.
So does Islam need to be reformed then? In conclusion, these are
Islam doesn't need to be reformed. What Islam needs to be is that Islam needs to be established in its correct way and correct form. Unfortunately, because of all this sort of battle against the between the liberalists and the secularists against Islamists, this is why Islam has become really conflated, confused, murky in the Muslim world. So it's about time that the Muslims take the reign in their own hand and establish correct Islamic system, so that they can actually show the exemplary life of a Muslim in the world.
Jazakallah khair. It was a pleasure to have you both on the show. Thank you for coming.
For the invitation.
Barakallah fiqh. Dear listeners, thank you very much for joining the show, and inshallah until next time, once again, assalamu alaikum.
Middle Path Radio, your number one online Islamic talk station.